Christmas Eve was supposed to be just another box checked on his calendar, but the moment Daniel Cross stepped into the hospital lobby, something shifted inside his chest. The air smelled of disinfectant and pine reeds, an odd mix of cold efficiency and forced cheer. Nurses moved briskly, volunteers hummed carols near a plastic tree, and families whispered hopes they were afraid to say out loud. Daniel told himself he was here for 10 minutes, long enough to drop off a donation and leave. 5 months after his divorce, routines were all he trusted. At 41, Daniel had everything people admired and nothing he wanted. His company's logo glowed on billboards across the city, his penthouse overlooked the river, and his name opened doors without knocking. Yet Christmas had become unbearable. It echoed. Every room did. He blamed the quiet on success, on ambition, on the price of winning. It was easier than admitting he missed the woman who once believed in him before anyone else did. He checked his watch, then froze. Across the lobby, the automatic doors opened with a soft sigh, letting in a swirl of snow and a woman stepping carefully over the threshold. She held something close to her chest, wrapped in a pale blanket. Daniel's breath caught, not because of the baby but because of the way she moved. Slow. Protective. Familiar. The way she once cradled his coffee on rushed mornings. The way she used to lean into him during storms. His mind said coincidence. His heart said her name. 5 months ago he had told himself leaving was strength. He needed focus. Space. Control. He had promised himself emotions could wait. Now, standing beneath twinkling lights that felt suddenly too bright, Daniel felt the ground tilt. The woman adjusted the blanket, revealing a tiny face, eyes closed, peaceful and unaware of the silence crashing around him. The world did not stop. But Daniel did. In that instant, every choice he'd defended began asking questions he could no longer ignore. And as the doors slid shut behind her, he understood with terrifying clarity that this Christmas wasn't about endings at all. It was about a truth he had run from finally catching up. Daniel didn't follow her. Not yet. His feet refused to move as if the marble floor had quietly claimed him. Around him, the hospital carried on. Laughter near the reception desk, a child tugging at a balloon, the distant chime of an elevator. None of it felt real. His eyes stayed fixed on the space she had crossed, replaying the way her shoulders curved inward, the careful way she balanced the weight in her arms. He knew that posture. He had once teased her for being too careful with fragile things. He sank into a chair, pressing his palms together to steady the tremor running through him. Logic tried to take over. Could be anyone. The city was full of women with auburn hair. Hospitals were full of newborns. Yet memory argued back, sharp and vivid. Her laugh. Her stubborn kindness. The way she always paused before stepping into cold air, bracing herself. 5 months earlier he had walked away convinced he was doing the right thing. He told himself love had become a distraction, that partnership slowed momentum. She hadn't argued. That had unsettled him more than anger ever could. She had only asked one quiet question, whether success would keep him warm at night. He hadn't answered. He had packed a bag instead. Now the question returned, heavier than before. Daniel stood abruptly, almost knocking the chair over. If it wasn't her, he would leave and never mention this moment again. But if it was, he didn't finish the thought. He moved toward the corridor leading to maternity services, heart pounding loud enough to drown out reason. Each step felt like crossing a line he had drawn himself. A nurse passed by, smiling, wishing him a happy holiday. He nodded, unable to speak. Through a glass wall ahead, he glimpsed her again, closer this time. There was no doubt now. The curve of her face, thinner than he remembered. The tired strength in her eyes. And the baby, nestled against her as if the world could not reach them there. Daniel stopped just short of calling out her name. The man who had once chosen pride over love suddenly understood something painful and powerful. Some moments don't ask for permission. They demand courage. And if he turned away now, the silence he feared would follow him for the rest of his life. Her name formed in his throat but refused to become sound. Daniel watched from a few steps away as she paused near the window, gently rocking the baby while snow drifted past the glass like falling feathers. The sight pulled him backward in time, to evenings when she used to hum while cooking, unaware he was listening, to mornings when she'd rest her head against his shoulder as if the world made sense there. She looked different, yet unmistakably herself. Stronger in a quiet way. Tired, yes, but grounded, as if life had reshaped her instead of breaking her. The baby stirred, a tiny hand slipping free of the blanket, and she smiled, a small, private smile that Daniel remembered too well. It was the smile she wore when she felt safe. A sharp ache spread through his chest. He replayed the moment she had told him about the child. The office lights had been too bright, his phone buzzing non-stop, his mind already racing ahead. He had heard the words but not their meaning. Fear had answered for him. He had spoken about timing, about pressure, about how everything was happening too fast. He had convinced himself distance was kindness. Now, watching her cradle a life he had refused to face, that excuse collapsed. She turned and their eyes met. The world narrowed to that single second. Recognition flickered across her face, surprise first, then something guarded. She didn't smile. She didn't turn away. She simply held his gaze, steady and unreadable, as if weighing whether he deserved to exist in this moment at all. Daniel stepped forward, hands open, a silent apology written across his posture. He wanted to say 1,000 things. That he'd been wrong. That he'd been afraid. That no success had filled the space she left behind. But none of it felt worthy yet. The baby shifted again, letting out a soft sound that cut through the tension. Daniel felt it like a bell rung deep inside him. This wasn't about explanations or regrets anymore. This was about showing up, something he had failed to do before. And as she adjusted the blanket and waited, he understood the hardest truth of all. Love doesn't disappear when you walk away. It waits, quietly, to see who you become when you finally turn back. Daniel stopped a careful distance away, close enough to feel the warmth of the moment but far enough to respect the space he had once shattered. She shifted the baby slightly, instinctively turning her body so the child remained protected. That small movement spoke louder than any words. It reminded him that trust, once broken, did not rush back simply because time had passed. "You look well," he said finally, the words feeling thin and inadequate the moment they left his mouth. She studied him for a second, then nodded. "I'm getting there." Her voice was calm, steady, and that steadiness unsettled him more than anger ever could. "Hospitals have a way of changing you," she added, glancing down at the baby. "They teach you what actually matters." Daniel swallowed. He noticed the faint tiredness around her eyes, the way her free hand rested against her back as if easing an ache. Guilt pressed in on him, heavy and unrelenting. He had imagined this conversation 100 times during sleepless nights, but none of those rehearsed speeches survived the reality standing in front of him. "I didn't know you were here," he said, though they both understood the truth behind that statement ran deeper. He hadn't known because he hadn't asked. Because knowing would have required responsibility. "I didn't expect to see you either," she replied. There was no bitterness in her tone, only honesty. "But I'm glad this place is full today. It makes moments like this less loud." The baby let out a soft sound, barely more than a breath. Daniel's heart tightened. He leaned slightly forward, stopping himself just in time. "May I?" he asked, nodding gently toward the child. She hesitated, not long but long enough for him to feel the weight of it. Then she shifted the blanket just enough for him to see the tiny face. Peaceful. Perfect. Real. Something in Daniel finally gave way. All the ambition, all the defenses he had built to protect himself from vulnerability, cracked open in silence. He understood then that redemption didn't arrive with grand gestures or dramatic promises. It began right here, in humility, in patience, in the courage to stay when walking away felt easier. And for the first time in months he didn't feel the urge to run. They stood there longer than either of them expected, surrounded by strangers who had no idea a life was quietly rearranging itself in the corner of a hospital lobby. Daniel became aware of how shallow his breathing had been, how carefully he now inhaled, as if the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell in a rhythm that felt steadier than his own. "I was angry for a long time," she said at last, her eyes still on the child. "Not the kind of anger that shouts. The kind that makes you quiet." She shifted her weight, then looked at him. "But anger gets heavy when you carry it alone. I had to put it down." Daniel nodded, unable to interrupt. He didn't deserve to. She continued, her voice low. "I learned how strong I could be when there was no one else to lean on. That surprised me. I learned I didn't need rescue. I needed honesty." Her gaze held his. "That's why I didn't call." The words landed gently, but they carried truth sharp enough to cut through every excuse he had ever rehearsed. Daniel felt the instinct to defend himself rise, and then fade. He was tired of defending. Tired of being right and alone. "I don't expect anything from you," she said softly. "I came here to close a chapter, not reopen one." For a moment, fear whispered that he was already too late. That this was simply the final page. But then the baby stirred again, eyes fluttering open briefly before settling. The sight filled Daniel with something unfamiliar yet undeniable, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with achievement. I don't want to make promises I can't keep, he said, choosing each word with care. But I want to be present. Consistent. Even if that means starting at the very beginning. She searched his face, looking past the polished exterior, past the man the world applauded. She was searching for effort, not perfection. Outside, the snow thickened, softening the city's sharp edges. Inside, time slowed. Daniel realized that miracles didn't always arrive wrapped in certainty. Sometimes they arrived as second chances, quiet, fragile, and brave enough to ask one simple question. Will you stay this time? She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she took a slow step toward the exit, then paused as if deciding whether the next move belonged to the past or the future. Daniel followed, not beside her but slightly behind, where someone goes when they finally understand they are no longer leading. The automatic doors opened again, releasing them into the quiet glow of Christmas lights and falling snow. Outside, the city felt softer, almost forgiving. Cars moved slowly. Streetlights shimmered. The baby stirred, letting out a small sound that carried more weight than any speech Daniel had ever given. He watched as she adjusted the blanket, her movements calm and sure. This was not the woman he had left behind. This was someone who had grown through uncertainty and come out steadier on the other side. I don't need you to be perfect, she said at last, her breath visible in the cold air. I need you to be real. To show up even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. Daniel nodded, emotion pressing against his ribs. For the first time he didn't try to hide it. I spent years building things that could impress people, he said quietly. But standing here, I realize none of it taught me how to be present. I want to learn. Not all at once. Just, honestly. She looked at him, really looked, as if measuring not his words but the silence behind them. Then, carefully, she stepped closer and angled the baby slightly toward him. Not an invitation. Not forgiveness. An opening. The world seemed to hold its breath. Daniel didn't reach out. He simply stood there, steady, letting the moment exist without rushing it. And in that stillness something changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. He understood that life wasn't offering him a reward. It was offering responsibility, growth, and meaning. As church bells rang faintly in the distance, Daniel realized this Christmas would be remembered not for what he gained, but for what he chose to become. And for the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a decision.